we'll just, I think we'll just, okay, let's go. Cool, so we got seats, we've got Jane. Hello. Sorry. Hi, everyone. So I think we're just getting everyone up. Yes, would you like to come up? Adrian and Tim. Excellent. Have we got the live streaming going already? Yes. Yes, live streaming, good. Okay, so we just started a little bit late to make sure that everyone was here, and everyone is here now, which is great. So welcome everyone. I'm Liz Jakubowski, Director and Founder of Ribbit, here in Data61, part of the CSIRO. Thank you to everyone in the room here for joining us tonight. We're thrilled that you're here, and it's going to be a really exciting night. So first, a few things. You'll note that this is a live streamed event, so we've got the cameras there and it's also being recorded. There's actually several satellite groups that are listening and watching right now, and I'd like to give special mention to some of these people out there and also some of the VIPs. So from Engineers Australia, we have Senior Office Holder, Chair of the National Women's Committee, Melissa Jovic, here with us. And remotely, we've got Glenda Graham and Ashley P. in Melbourne. Ashley is the author of a recent report on gender diversity and inclusion, and you can actually find that on the Engineers Australia website, so very, very topical for our discussion tonight. We've also got media following this on live stream, and I was told to mention the hashtag, which is D61WIT. Okay, you can't see that, but that's what it is, right? All right, now I'm meant to point out the restrooms and the exits. They're basically that way, both of them right next to each other if we run into any trouble. Now I'd like to introduce the panel. So here on my left, I've got our magnificent moderator, Jane Scowcroft. Jane's a Senior Product Manager at Data61 and also an amazing software engineer. She's got a string of awards to her name, and she'll be asking questions of our audience and guiding our panel tonight. Welcome, Jane. Let's give her a big clap. Next, we have the amazing Karen Lawson. So Karen, probably known to a lot of people in this room, is CEO of the Slingshot Accelerator, just launched, co-ventured, and a member of our Ribbit Advisory Board. She's a former CEO of one of Australia's largest recruitment platforms, and she brings her amazing knowledge to the tech and entrepreneurial community, and she's a great supporter of any initiative related to women in technology. Please welcome Karen. Adrian Turner, CEO of Data61. He's our host for the evening. And in his leadership role, Adrian constantly talks to us about his 100% commitment to increasing diversity and inclusion in the organisation and changing the profile of women and young people in technology. It's great to have a visionary leader like Adrian, so let's hear it for him. And next we have Irene Hsieh. So Irene is a remarkable young woman. She is president of the UTS Engineering Society, which is one of the largest in the country. And she's actually squeezing us in tonight before her society ball. And then there's going to be, yes, and then there's going to be a quick change, then heading off to Stanford in California on the weekend to pick up a special honorary fellowship award. Oh, and her mum and her sister are in the audience somewhere here tonight. Where are they? Yes, over there. Hi. Welcome, guys. Let's give Irene and her family a big hand. Tim Reed. Tim Reed, CEO of MYOB. Tim is a hands-on CEO, and his mantra is never do things that feel wrong. Listen to your inner voice. If something doesn't feel right, don't do it. So Tim's going to tell us how he sees it here tonight. Welcome, Tim. And our last wonderful panellist is Holly. I saw Holly speak in Brisbane about 4 or 5 months ago, and I was just totally blown away. She's the founder of Women in Digital. It's got a global membership of women that's connecting women across events, mentoring, training opportunities all around the world. And she's also the founder of Digital Talent and one of Queensland's leading entrepreneurs. So big welcome to Holly. Okay, that's it for the panel. So now to perform our acknowledgement of country, we are delighted to have our wonderful Indigenous cadet Nina Gray, who is part of the Ribbit team here at Data61 to perform this ceremony. Thank you.
Gudamali niya nunya buba badaru darmbo. Niyami gala nyathu gramio gapa. Hello, I am Green Tree Frog, and this is not my grandmother's land. Being a Darnbal, Nunakal, and Kamilaroi descendant of country, it is my honour to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people, who used Redfern themselves as a meeting place prior to European settlement in 1788. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank elders, aunties and uncles, past, present and future, who continue to inspire, motivate and educate us young people.
Thank you, Nina. And now I would like to introduce our host for the night, our CEO of Data61, Adrian Turner.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's incredible, and there are some familiar faces in the audience and on the panel as well. And to take time out of your busy schedules is appreciated, and it's such an important conversation that we're going to be having this evening. I'm relatively new into this role, but I'm absolutely committed to diversity in all of its forms. And we'll talk more about it, but in my own personal experience, it's been women that have inspired me and actually given me a leg up in my career, but also diversity in other forms. Whilst I'm not formally a male champion of change, I do practice the guidelines of male champion of change, including panel composition, which Liz can attest to for this evening. And certainly I don't claim to have all of the answers around the topics that we're going to be discussing tonight. I think it's an unsolved challenge, and I personally think the lack of diversity in the country right now, from the board level right through the tech sector, is a crisis for the country, and I don't think we're going to realise our full potential until we resolve it. You've all been invited here because you play an important role in the technology community, and I hope that we'll hear from some of you as well with questions later on. And I just want to share with you some of the things that we're doing as it relates to diversity as an organisation. So there is a program called SAGE, Science in Gender Equity, and CSIRO is committed to that. We're working through a process right now where we're making a formal submission. It's peer reviewed, but we have to demonstrate concrete actions that the organisation is taking, including capturing data on recruitment, career development, career progression, and activities in each of these areas. We have mentorship arrangements within CSIRO. Our CEO, Larry Marshall, is a male champion of change, as I know is Tim. We have programs to assist individuals returning from extended leave. We have the Ruby Payne Scott Award, which is up to $10,000 to assist staff returning from extended leave and to help them re-engage in their field of work. We have a variety of childcare services, big and small. The LGBTI staff network was set up in, I believe it was 2013, inside of the organisation. And we have dedicated external support environment as well. So we'll talk more about, I think, what diversity means to all of us, and it's not just gender diversity. It's other forms of diversity that we'll talk about. But I'll hand over to Jane. Jane leads our product management organisation, and I'm sure we'll do a fantastic job in us having an authentic conversation here. So thanks very much, Jane, and over to you.
I feel like the bar is being set very, very high. I'm really excited to be here tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on this somewhat rainy Thursday evening. I love being a moderator on a panel because I have all control and no responsibility for contributing anything of value. But as you know, when I was coaching Tony Jones just before he took over Q&A as the moderator, I said, don't shy away from tough conversations, robust debate. Don't worry about having that creative or the constructive tension in the dialogue. And our panelists all today have confirmed that they're more than happy to address any sort of questions that come up tonight. Happy to be frank, fearless, and honest in the conversation. As Adrian said, this is still an unsolved mystery in our industry today. And in research, we talk about open research questions. So these are things that are still unknown that we still need to discover. Diversity for us in Australia is still one of those open research questions in the business sense. And as Adrian said, diversity happens across all sort of spectrums, not just diversity that you can see, but also having that element of cognitive diversity. And we'll touch on a number of those elements throughout the night. So the model, the frame that we're going through tonight, so I'll ask a couple of first questions for our panel, and then we'll open it up. We have some amazing industry influencers who've submitted questions that are absolutely fabulous, just so you're prepared. And then we'll let the panel sort of respond. We'll and then have some time for you all to ask some questions from the audience. But we've got a lot to get through, no time like the present to kick it off. And we want to make sure that we do have a very respectful conversation tonight, and also leave this evening with thoughtful action. So what can we actually do? What can we take on the next steps? So to kick off, we want to make sure we have a shared understanding, a shared language, a common base to move from. So for each of the panelists, I'd like you to share with us, what does diversity mean for you, and what's an example, a personal example that you see of diversity within your workplace or at home life, whatever it might be. And Holly, do you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. Diversity for me is beyond gender. It's about thought, it's about experience, age, culture. I'm sure that's a shared opinion across the panel. Diversity in action. I mean, I've worked in the tech industry and digital industry for the last 10, 15 years, so I've seen a limited number of females in the industry. One of the reasons why I started Women in Digital was because I was working as a recruiter at Chandler McLeod and saw the number of females that would come into me for these roles in digital, and they would just feel uncomfortable asking for the salary that they deserved, and you compare that to their male counterparts. And I was really disappointed to see, there was a large disparity. So I thought we have to do something about this through a mentoring program. So that's one example of diversity of experience, or I guess confidence that I want to address through Women in Digital.
Yeah. But let's be structured.
So I totally agree. Diversity isn't just about gender. It's about age. It's about ethnic background. It's really about experiences. And so for me, in trying to think about how we build a diverse team and a diverse workforce, it's how can we bring a breadth of experiences that bring a breadth of viewpoints to the goal that we're trying to achieve. Believing that if we can get that breadth of different voices and different inputs, we're far more likely to be successful in the journey, but recognising the fact that that actually makes it a more challenging environment to manage. From a personal experience, it's probably really struck me. I'm the father of teenage girls, and I just couldn't believe in my daughter's school, which they both go to the same school. It's a great school, it's a girls' school, how once they hit year 9, the participation in science just dropped off, and at their brother's school, it just picks up. And as an employer who's trying to, as a male champion of change, we set very public targets and we report against those targets for the gender diversity that we have coming into our business. it's a real struggle when the pipeline is just narrowing and narrowing. And so for me, that's probably the experience over the last couple of years that has really energised me to say I need to be part of something bigger than just what's my job. I need to play a more active role in our community in really championing some change.
Well, for me, diversity is to embrace people of all walks of life. So first, I think is to identify people with the superficial barriers that we put on people, such as, like you said, title, status, gender identity, race, culture. I could go on forever. But I think identifying that first is a good step forward. And then inviting them into conversations without excluding any groups of people. That includes the mainstream. So it doesn't mean to exclude the mainstream group of people. It means to be inclusive. Diversity also means to be inclusive. For me, I recently went to the Microsoft headquarters in Seattle, and I was lucky enough to tour the Inclusive Lab. And there, Microsoft was trying to find ways to be inclusive and design gaming systems for people with disabilities. So for example, how do you let someone to compete online without a thumb? How do you allow someone that's blind to navigate a menu? And for me, it was really interesting to see how inclusive mindsets could be put on a group of minorities, and how can we cross-pollinate strategies and ideas so we can be inclusive in all types of areas across workplaces and life. So for me, that was eye-opening. And a quote I picked up over there was, when you deliberately and unintentionally do not include, you will unintentionally exclude. So for me, I made a conscious effort now to always be inclusive in the language I use and the actions that I have, because it impacts those around me. And for me, that's really important. Inclusion also comes with diversity.
So for me, it's also all of those things. So it's cultural diversity. In Data61, for example, we have a team from 70 different countries in the organisation. It is gender, it's absolutely age. So you'll hear me talking about boards as an example, not only gender diversity, but age diversity. So the average age of a non-executive director in Australia is 63. I think that's a problem. And Data61 is mission-driven for the country. And what we want to do is drive systemic change. So for me, the system's broken. It's absolutely broken. We're at such an amazing time in history for humanity where we've got IT, material sciences, and biology coming together. And I think it's a tragedy that half of the population isn't fully participating. And I think that's a function of a broken system and some closed mindsets that we hope to change. And I'm absolutely vocal about it, and as Data61, want to lead the country by example.
Okay, I'm going to start with something, which is we talk about male champions of change, and they might have a label, but I'd like to call out Adrian because actually his daughter's in this room tonight, reading a book, which is excellent. And maybe some of that even stemmed from the first conversation that Liz and Adrian and I had, which was, where does this start? And it really starts as daughters. And so I think this is a great example of a leader that's also championing change through his children. So thank you and welcome today. So for all the mothers and fathers in the room and listening, I think that's also a responsibility of all of us. I think it's so much has already been talked about, so I might just reflect on something that's personal to me. I'm one of, let me think now, 16% of women that are CEOs, and so there are not very many of us. And so I think that stretches our burden or maybe our responsibility, and it's a real joy and a delight to be here tonight, so thank you so much. But one of the things that I made a very conscious decision about when I moved into being a CEO was being very authentic and very open about fears, worries, not really being ready for the role. Quite frankly, it doesn't matter what role you're in, you often don't feel that you're ready for that. And that doesn't stop when you're a CEO, that doesn't stop when you're a board member, and that does not stop when you're a chairman. But somehow along the way, we forget to tell people that actually we're kind of constantly in this imposter syndrome. And I think with females, it's really important to hear that actually the first time I became a CEO, I was really crapping myself. Because the next time that you go for maybe a job that you don't feel that you're ready for, you know that someone that stood before you and was vulnerable and told you how they felt, maybe that just made you feel like, well, Karen did this and I can do that too. So I think diversity is everything we've talked about, but it's also about maybe more of us sharing some of our vulnerabilities, and I think that will help women step up a little bit more quickly because they often hold themselves back, and that's what we've got to change.
Yeah, so we're starting to see some very similar themes coming through, particularly around authenticity, around that element of inclusion. And to your point, it's not just about having daughters in the room, but it's also about having sons. Yeah. Diversity is a whole of population, whole of system thing that we need to look at. Before we turn to questions from the room, I'm curious from the panel, if you were to, getting down to brass tacks, what is the single biggest challenge facing women in tech, because you are a Women in Tech event, what is the single biggest challenge or barrier facing women in tech, and how are you looking at addressing that in your workplace?
It's you. Stop blaming everything else, stop blaming the system, stop blaming education, stop blaming all of those things. You've got to take control of your own career, you've got to step forward, you've got to put your hand up. I can tell you that leaders are very, very aware that they want diversity. This is not now something that is not spoken about. It's often data, statistics, it's proven across the world. Your EBITDA, if you have diversity that sits within your business, is often about 14 times higher. So this is commercial. So these things are really, really important. So I think that we kind of need to change that conversation of, how can we help women? It's actually, you need guys to step up. And you're so lucky if you are in technology because you're quite rare. And as we all know, rare species stand out. And I think that's a great opportunity for you to step forward. I've worked in male-dominated environments all of my life. And it's been a joy, quite frankly, because I've seen the good rather than that makes me feel uncomfortable. So I really do think step up. If you see a friend or a colleague not doing that, call him or her out on that. But just embrace it, step forward, stop being a victim.
Do we have thoughts from the rest of the panel? Yeah.
I personally think it's about role modelling. I mean, you were saying you're, part of the 16% of CEOs that are female, and that's a big problem in the tech industry. We don't have enough female leaders, sort of stepping forth. I think, what you see, you can imagine, you can become when you can kind of identify with a leader, see how they've built their career, and you don't feel weird. I think that's a real big, important phenomenon in the industry. When you're the sole female coder in a team of, 10, 15, you either thrive in that environment, others don't, and they often leave the industry or, go and find another company. So I think I completely agree with you. It's time for women to step up. I mean, I've worked with women in Bangladesh who, are told that they should not be working at all, or they should not feel empowered, and they have to overcome massive cultural stereotypes. Here in Australia, we're so fortunate that there's a big push towards diversity. There's so many male champions of change, so we do need people to step up, but we also need females to be supported into those leadership roles, so younger women are encouraged as well.
I might add on to that because that's exactly what I was going to say. So seeing more role models in senior positions as a young female would be really encouraging. Seeing them, how they handle difficult situations, what do you do when you need to be, when you need to be firm, when you need to be tough at times. For me, because I'm trying to figure these things out. But if I don't have a role model, if I don't have a mentor, I'm kind of lost, and I don't know if this is right. It's reassuring to know there are people who have been through what I've been through, and just give me advice and say, it's okay, we've all been through this. And And I think I would love to see more female mentees with male mentors or vice versa, because it does start conversations, but also it helps me understand, it helps both parties involved in the mentorship to understand what are the barriers facing for both genders into this conversation. So I think more mentorship and definitely more role models in senior positions is the answer.
And perhaps just marrying together those two thoughts of sort of the problem being you and put yourself forward and be courageous, etc., but also the support that having role models there for women who are developing roles in tech. As an organisation, we have really good female representation, not outstanding, but good. But when you boil it down to the engineering, the software engineering team within our organisation, it's not good at all. And so we're putting really explicit steps in place to try and change that, starting with recruitment, but also then going through and looking at what is it that we can do to support the women who are there. So being one of 15 is actually a really, that's something that we will openly talk to women about. So we would rather have, most of our agile teams are about 8 or 10. We'd rather have 3 and have an all-male team than have 3 teams that have 1 woman. Because if they're going to feel on their own and not supported and in a minority and we lose them, then we'd rather wait until we concede and then seed another team that has a minimum amount of women. Now that's a choice, so we don't force that on anyone. If somebody wants to go into a team and she's happy to take that on in those circumstances. But it's having those conversations and for us making sure that women know that they've got permission to ask, they've got permission to comment, they've got, frankly, permission to criticise. And if we get to it, I'm happy to share some of the things that I'm least proud of that have happened in our organisation that have been brought to the attention because we've tried to shine a light on the conversation and given women permission to say, this is how that made me feel. And I think if you can get that conversation, there's a ton of goodwill, but it's got to go past goodwill to actually being okay to be uncomfortable, because they are uncomfortable conversations. The men in our organisation would love for the change to have happened, but actually being a part of that change is something that at times does make them feel uncomfortable. And so we've got to all create an environment where it's okay to have those conversations.
And I'm sure it's not just the men who want that change to have already happened.
I'm sure it's not.
Adrian, do you have some thoughts you'd like to?
Yeah, I mean, this is it's a system problem. So there's a lot of interrelated parts to a solution to this. So, and I don't claim to have all the answers, at all. But if you think about the role models, I think it starts with our senior leadership, but also boards. If you think about the other end of the spectrum and kids, so on a personal level, my wife works with kids and she leads a girls group for girls around about 11 or 12, because it turns out that at that age, for whatever reason, these amazing, courageous, fearless kids, something changes in the dynamic in and around. And so we've got to fix that at a systemic level, because we just don't have enough kids wanting to be inspired to come into the profession. And it's interesting, I went out to my daughter's school to talk about robotics, and around 100 fourth graders. And the level of energy and engagement and curiosity, and it was absolutely amazing. And what I took away from that is maybe we're not doing a good enough job as leaders in the industry in kind of contextualizing what, STEM is this abstract label, but when you apply mathematics and coding to robotics and you can build a system that can rove around on another planet, that's an amazing thing. And so I think part of it is also, and we struggle with this inside our organisation, is how do we communicate the stories and tell the stories to inspire?
Yeah. I think you bring up a great point about filling that pipeline for STEM, regardless of gender, regardless of background.
Right.
We're going to dive into the influencer question. And because we have so much to get through, we'll be selective about which panelists respond. So I'm giving you permission to whomever wants to dive in first to answer the question, because we'll probably have about sort of 2 responses each, if that's all right. And I'd like to invite Eugenie, who's, I feel like there's a lot of feedback, sorry. Eugenie to ask the first question. So Eugenie's from St. George High School. And if, as I say your name, you don't mind sort of standing up, and we have some roving mics for you. I think this will tie very nicely into our conversation around role models and what the sort of young women are looking for.
Good evening. I'm a Year 12 student and I've just enrolled in an engineering degree at university. Given all the issues around women in technology, what advice do you have for young women like me looking to start a career in technology?
I'd actually say you're the lucky one, because when you come out, you're going to be snapped up. Got all these students going, how am I going to get a job? And it's like, no, not you, you're going to be fine.
Learn to say no. Learn to not accept the first offer. That's the
yeah. And it might be, it might sound like a frivolous comment, but it's true. You know, we're so lucky when we're females and we're in technology. You're a female and you're in a key management position. You're cherished. You're actually looked after. Not everywhere, but we're really, really lucky in this day and age that there is so much awareness about this. So you will be fine. Maybe the ones in nursing, not so much. So I'll let somebody else go.
I would just say get involved in as many student communities and, like women in digital, women in technology, whatever, so that people know about you and you can get the best offer.
So, independent of your personal circumstance, just from a career development point of view, I'd say find somebody that you have a really good relationship, that you respect, that can be a mentor for you, that can be away from your work environment, that you can build trust with. And back to the comment I made at the start, for me, I crossed paths over in the US with a woman who, amazing mentor, she's like my Yoda. And it turns out, I mean, she is a mentor to a lot of CEOs that you would know the name of and that you would read about in technology. And so if you see people progress through their career, don't be afraid to ask for help along the way.
No,
very
quickly. I call it a personal board of directors. So create your personal board of directors. You don't always need to go and ask, will you be my mentor? It's about that reciprocal relationship. It's really important. Put time into it. Don't take from people. It's a giving and a receiving relationship. And if you really do that, you will be successful all the way through your life.
I just want to add on to that thing.
We're breaking
all the rules. None of you pay attention. No. Yeah, sorry, no.
Because I just want to mention about my mentor as well. I had an amazing mentor in my second year, and I just want to mention that going to engineering was daunting for me, and I was really inconfident. And I think for a lot of girls, it's like that as well, because I will be competing against guys who are working on cars on the weekend, and that's exactly what's being tested. So on a technical level, I was really insecure, and she taught me to take my strengths, take my weakness and turn them into strengths. And for me, that meant, I was good at empathizing with people, communicating, but I wasn't so strong in my coding abilities. And she said, that's okay, focus on your weakness. Definitely work on what you're not good at, but also let yourself shine in what you're good at, what comes naturally. And don't be apologetic about who you are, what you're passionate about. So. Yeah.
And just for the audience, I'm fairly sure Eugenie has cards on the table because Irene's her older sister, so you've got a great role model at home. But then paying it forward, so how can you act as a role model for some of these 11 or 12-year-old girls who are self-selecting out of STEM? Great. Jackie Daly, who's the Director of Digital Government Health Australia, has an excellent question for us about the technology industry.
It's like Q&A. Thank
Thanks.
It is like that's
Q&A.
That's what Tony said. Yeah.
Good evening, panel. How does the panel define the technology industry? If the definition has two schools, pure and applied, do the barriers to gender diversity present differently for each and hence generate the need for a diversity of responses?
Do you have, who would like to tackle that one first?
So I've only worked in applied, so it's hard for me to comment on what the differences are there. My perspective would be that diversity is going to be equally important across both, but I would only say that from a principles perspective rather than from an experience perspective.
So
Maybe from the research, yeah.
I can, it's really hard to generalise about environments, and I don't have the statistics at my fingertips, but I do know anecdotal stories of women in pure research environments that have held very senior positions that have found it incredibly difficult to achieve what they want to achieve in those environments. From an applied point of view, I think there is a factor of what is the industry that you're applying the research to. So there are, without doubt, different dynamics in different industry sectors. So I think there is a difference. But I also can't be more specific than that. So I don't want to,
I think it sounds like a good research question to pose for the pure side of the equation. I'd next like to ask Rita Holland, who's a founder of Employer.
Sorry, I was going to ask your thoughts on that. I mean, you asked the question.
Turning the tables.
I would probably say very much along the lines of your comment that in the applied environment, if, for example, you're going into a construction industry, you're going to be facing the gender barriers of the construction industry to which you're trying to apply your technological skills. I think in the pure side of the industry, and I'd be interested to hear what your my first part of the question, what's the definition of the industry? My observations would be that in the pure side, the barriers to women succeeding mirror those of all the pure research environments. I look at academia and who are getting those high-level positions in universities and research environments, and it's not the women. And I wonder why, when academia is leading the way and providing the vision one would hope for sectors and for government and for policymakers, why they're not leading by example when it's a critical point they're generating the technologists of the future.
We might move on, have that as an open question. Yeah. Rita is the founder of Employability and has a question for us that I think touches nicely into this idea of compound privilege. So once you have a leg up, it's continuously easier to keep on getting legs up and progressing. So Rita, over to you.
So thank you. I think my question's not too much of a gap from that one. So for the last 30 years, we may know that more women have had course completions at bachelor level and higher than men. But we know that they're underrepresented in both STEM subjects and in leadership roles. So my question to, I don't know who in the panel, what responsibilities / opportunities do universities have to actually not only get more women from those STEM subjects to actually apply for more and agitate more opportunities in those industries, but also how to get them into more leadership roles, and where does the university's responsibilities lie with that?
I'd actually like to ask Irene to address that one first. So you give a lot into the university. What do you expect back from them?
Absolutely. I think what I've experienced and also what I ran before were the mentorship programs. And I think those are fantastic. Like I was saying before, role models definitely pave the way to younger females to have that courage to take on leadership roles. And I think as universities are refining that, making it scalable, making it efficient, because sometimes mentorship, you come together, you meet for 1 year, and the mentorship, falls apart. If it could be sustainable, if it could be a long-term kind of partnership happening as you progress through your career pathway, I would love to see that happening at universities. Love to see that happening. Yeah.
It's So perhaps something to add, we at MYOB we run a program called Develop Her, which we've made an undertaking to make sure at entry-level engineering roles we're aiming for 50-50, but at a minimum are inside a 40% band between men and women in each intake. And that's difficult because that's a lot higher than the computer science graduate population coming out. It's amazing since we've done it though, and really reflected on what it takes to make a workplace that works for all of a sudden it's actually not as hard as it was with just a little bit of thought and work. But we ran a program called Develop Her to supplement our graduate recruitment, and that was where we took mature age women who had work experience elsewhere but wanted a change in career in, and it was a paid internship, so we paid them a full salary through 6 months, and through 6 months of training tried to get them to the same level as a graduate coming into one of our crews. When I spoke to the women who went through the first batch of that, they simply said it wasn't on my radar. I didn't even know that these jobs existed. No one talked about it. None of my friends talked about it. It was never put to me that this was something, so I went into retail. Well, the difference between what you earn in a retail environment compared to a software engineer is material, right? And then we get to the end of people's career where women's super is half of men's and so on. And so for her, she said, had I known about this as a teenager, I think I would have considered a career much, much sooner. But I just didn't know about it. So how much is the university responsible? Absolutely, the university is responsible. How much are we responsible as leaders in industry? We're absolutely responsible. One of the things I'm trying to get my team to do is to write to every school principal in Victoria, because most of our biggest software engineering centres in Melbourne, and to invite all of the year 8 and 9 girls in to have a talk to some of the young women who are in our software engineering team about what it's like to be a software engineer. Because it's actually much better than lots of other positions, and we work really hard to listen to them and try and make it a great environment for them. And to Karen's point, you are special, and you're treated that way because we go to great lengths to try and make it work. So my answer is we're all responsible. The universities are responsible, but we can't leave it there. We've all got to put our hands up and be responsible.
Can I just add to the second part of your question about how we can actually advance or champion women to leadership roles? I think mentorship is incredibly invaluable, but also sponsoring. So, where you identify a high potential woman in the industry and keep her in mind consciously for new opportunities. That's something that I think men are great at, and it's something that, is a nice little cross-pollination. Horizon, you're probably all familiar with Horizon's great diversity success. They have, a bit of a program around improving the diversity. One of their initiatives is to have almost internships. So they'll take females and they'll put them together with an executive so they get to spend time together. So they've had 3 women go through that program so far, and that helps them to kind of see what a day in the life of an executive is, how they can get there, and obviously, really intimate mentoring with specifics in mind.
I just want to provide a bit of a counterbalance to the conversation around education. So we're talking about diversity of thinking, diversity of backgrounds. We come back to STEM, and yes, it's important, but it's not everything. I think the challenge with education is lazy employers. Education de-risks often your first choice. It shows that people have been able to apply themselves, they've got some degree of intelligence, but intelligence takes its form in many, many ways. Now, most of my career I've come up through IT, ICT, sales, have been a female in a very male-dominated environment. So sometimes the traits of what make you really successful isn't always about educational achievements. The way that we learn, the way that we develop, the way that we grow as individuals, the leaders we become, is not always because you have a degree. Maybe it's a degree of life. So I just want to also put into perspective that just because one side of your education is often about what is a piece of paper, arguably, actually what is more important is what you do after that piece of paper. But if you look at entrepreneurs, some of the most successful businesses around the world have been created by people with no educational achievement at all. If anything, many of them have been autistic or had some actual real challenge that has meant they could not make it in a very structured, formal environment. And so my challenge to everyone here is to not always think about following the traditional path, because if you follow those thinking processes, they can be mapped, they can be computerized, and maybe some of the things that make us most remarkable and most human are the things that will make us most successful.
Absolutely. When we talk about diversity, obviously there is diversity of background and diversity of thinking. I'd like to ask Dr. Eva Chan.
Okay, I might just jump in then.
Yeah.
Seeing as I've got the microphone.
You have permission.
I wanted to make two comments, if I might. My name is Karen Kerman, and I'm an executive with IBM, and I'm also on 4 boards. And I have worked full time for over 30 years, and have 2 children. So I want to just make a couple of comments that just haven't come out so far. The first is that on 2 of those boards, I was appointed to those boards, which are in the telecommunications environment, because they needed a woman. I am now chair of both of those boards. So I might have gone in as a token gesture, and it took me, 1 minute to decide, should I do it, or should I object on some moral principle, but I thought, no, I'll do it. And I brought in a different set of skills, a different approach. I don't have an engineering background, in fact, whereas all the others did. But nevertheless, there was something to offer. And so I wanted to just raise that idea of setting, whether it's use the word quotas or whether you use the words, so deliberately targeting diverse members of your board. I now have a board that's not only gender diverse but ethnically diverse, and I'm very proud of that. And it just took a little bit more time to think about it. But if you can't find somebody that has the skills you want in Australia, then you're just, from a diverse background, you're just not looking hard enough. So that was the first point I wanted to make. The second point was just in relation to the, biological fact that women tend to have children, and women tend to, not exclusively, but tend to want to spend time with those children during their younger years. And that has been probably the biggest challenge of my life. And the reason I've been able to do it and work full time for all of those years is because I've had roles that I've been able to manage flexibility. And so the core question for every task, even today, is what needs to be done and when do you need it, or when does it need to be done, and how can we then, when are the times we need to regroup as a team? And then that gives me the flexibility to balance everything else in my life to meet those deadlines, those targets, those community, the team engagements, without having to be in the office from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. And so from a practical point of view, I just wanted to throw those 2 things out, to the panel, because they're the things that have made the most difference to my career.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I was going to say that's absolutely correct about flexibility. If you look across every survey around the world that has said what is the single one thing a business leader can implement that will change if we're looking at gender diversity, it's actually flexibility. But if we look at, this is a really complex problem, and actually I was talking about it with my team the other day, Liz, you were on, I was like, I could talk about this for hours. But the other thing is, at that moment where you are deciding to have children, there's many things that happen. So the first thing is the woman holds themselves back on a promotion because they're thinking, right, I actually would like to have children. They're probably thinking, I would like to move companies, and they don't, so that holds them back. They might be thinking the extra promotion has additional stress, so that's not great for hormones, so that's not good either. And then it comes to the decision, if you are pregnant, and that's who's going to stay home and who's going to go to work, and then is the pay gender gap. And it's 25% or close to 23-24%. And so when you look at as a heterosexual couple, let's say, That's really challenging because often when you look at that from a practical point of view, the male is earning more and so the woman decides to stay home. I think when you see differences and we will start to see more progression is when we change that gender pay gap and you have a really authentic conversation about actually who stays home and who goes to work. So there's much work to be done. Yes, exactly. Well, then we have to address, maternity leave and paternity leave, and we are still so backward on so many levels.
Yeah, I mean, there's concrete things around that. So CSIRO introduced a balance program, so all roles flex in the last month or two. And around the gender pay gap, we've actually applied some of our machine learning team to do analysis, which they say is the first that they're able to find in the world on historical pay data in the organisation to look at any differences, and that's gone to the CSIRO board. So so I think great points and great suggestions, and I can relate. Both my parents were scientists, and mum was on a fast trajectory from a career point of view, and she stepped out of it and lived it. And I appreciate the fact that she was there for us as kids. But boy, it was painful watching her get back into the workforce and have to take on roles that she was way overqualified for, and have to deal with that.
These are big societal things, though, right? I think as employers, there is a growing perspective on flexibility, and frankly, as the male champions change, pretty much every company that's led by one of those 180 people are now moving to an all roles flex. What we're trying to do is make sure that the men take advantage of that as well. Because what would support a woman in that environment? Well, maybe if their partner worked 4 days a week and they did, and then they worked out what was going to happen the other days, rather than just feeling as though that's not okay to do as a guy. And so part of how we're judging that and trying to judge our success is that the flexibility isn't just available to all, but leveraged by women, but is actually leveraged by everyone, because I think that's supporting families, and I think when you support the family unit, it's going to be much easier for women to then not feel like they have to be compromising. And most men that you talk to would actually be quite happy with that, except that then they feel like, well, will that hold my career back? And so on. And you're like, okay, well, that's the core issue. We're trying to say no, right? And all of a sudden they're confronted with those same questions. And if they're honest with themselves, they say, well, actually, that's something that's potentially a burden that perhaps we should share.
Yeah. And just one thing practically. Just literally in the last week, the leadership cohort from CSIRO was together. I think it's about 30 of us. And one of the things that was explicitly discussed was leave loudly. Like if you're going off to do something, then announce it and have the leadership be really vocal in announcing that I've got to go and pick up a kid from school or go and do something else, but I'm out of here now.
It's sort of the best choice you can make for your career is who you choose to spend your life with, and that goes both ways, both males and females. We might jump to the first point that was raised there. We might jump to Melissa Djokovic, who's the chair of the National Women in Engineering for Engineers Australia, with a question around quotas and around targets.
Good evening. The question is about very important issue, which is targets. And engineering and related STEAM professionals are data-driven and evidence-based. Engineers Australia believes that we must use data and to drive actually gender diversity and inclusion. And to lead, we have committed to 30% minimum gender diversity across all levels of the organizations by 2020. It sounds very ambitious. Do you agree with Engineers Australia that it is a time for industry and government to adopt targets or similar measures to shift the deal?
Great. And before the panel answers about targets, because we do have a lot of questions to get through, I'm going to set you a target of being precise and concise in your response.
Yeah.
So, no, I scared people from jumping in. Sorry, yeah, go for it, Holly.
I think it's critical to have targets. I mean, what you don't measure, you don't manage. That's the old saying. So unless there's accountability, unless your KPIs are tied to those sort of recruitment or retention targets, you're just not going to get there. So I have a number of companies that will come to me and say, we desperately need more women. Here's a role that we've created. Find us a woman. You can't put a quota on one role. You absolutely need to have quotas across a 12-month period and have everybody working towards those targets, through different actions and across different roles. So I'm a big proponent of them.
Yes, you should have targets. Yes, they should be public, and yes, you should have to report against them. I don't at this point believe you should have quotas, because I think the consequence of a quota is that when a very deserving woman gets the role, the perspective is she got it because you had to hire a woman. And so from my perspective, you should have targets, should hold people accountable to them, but occasionally when you miss them, you want to do that so that you can reflect on it, have a retrospective and learn from it, rather than force an outcome, which is probably suboptimal to all.
Other thoughts, comments? All
right. So this is, Jane, a live discussion inside of Data61 right now. So team has come to me over the last 3 months and said we should have quotas. And I've said, convince me, show me the evidence. And to the team's credit, they have, and I've spent a lot more time digging around it. So I share Tim's sentiments that not quotas. I don't believe in quotas, but I do think we should be setting targets.
So we can create bumper stickers, D61, WIT, targets, not quotas. So we're going to jump, because we are live streaming, so we're going to jump to a question that came to us via the Twitter sphere from Chris Howard. And it relates to some of the conversations around governance. What could a young woman do to prepare herself for a board role? What skills are most useful? Who wants to dive in first?
Well, I think all boards are really different, so the first thing is to find out, every board has to have diversity. Actually, I was with an ASX chairman this morning and talking about exactly that. And he recognised that a lot of his team was very much bricks and mortar and retail, and not only wanted diversity of backgrounds, diversity of genders, but was really looking to build out an excellent new team that could take his business into the future. So I think the first question is of the chairman, which is, what's your vision? What are you trying to create? Where are your strengths and weaknesses? And then ask your role, is there a role for you there? Can you actually add that? Because that's what's really critical, is a kind of understanding that composition. And we often talk about the avoidance of groupthink inside a board. And so that element of diversity, age, gender, background, university, not university, is absolutely critical, because you want to challenge decision making, because that's what creates better decisions.
Offering cognitive diversity, great.
So in the last week, I've met with 2 of the largest global recruiting firms for directors. And we're experimenting with coursework for directors to help directors understand the opportunities tied to this digital transition that we're going through. It's the number one thing I hear when I talk with those firms, is they cannot find enough people that understand the implications of moving to data-driven businesses, the underlying economics and the drivers. And so I think for anyone in tech, I think it bodes really well, regardless of background, particularly in this country. If you look at, the top ASX companies, I think it's one out of 10 is a med tech company, and the others are, banks and supermarkets. And so as a country, that's not our future. They're important institutions for Australia, but that's not where the growth is going to come from and the new industries are going to get created. So I think there's an enormous amount of opportunity for anyone in tech to be sitting on boards.
I mean, Women in Technology have a board readiness program, so I think, you know, for someone like that young lady, that would be a perfect place to start, and they're connected with, you know, a lot of recruiters or employers who are desperate to get their hands on these newly minted young women who've got that qualification, so to speak.
Can I just add one little comment? I would just say first work out why you want to be on a board, and you know, frequently when I talk to people about it, they actually sort of don't understand fully what that is. And executive roles are fantastic, and we need lots of women in management roles as well. So I just put out there, make sure you understand why you want to do it, and I would make a pitch for lots of great intelligent women wanting to be leaders in hands-on management, operating businesses as well, because I think there's a lot that you can get done there too.
Can I just add on to that question? There were some fantastic answers on the board, but I just want to ask, especially with the program, would there be any advice that you give to a female, especially over male, who wants to take on a board position? Like a special advice?
Well, I mean, you know, anecdotally, women aren't as good negotiators, or you know, not as good at pushing ideas ahead. So I suppose, you know, public speaking skills are essential, and you know, for a young woman to develop those so they feel confident presenting in what's, you know, traditionally a group of white older men. Make sure that they feel confident to push their opinions, because that's what, you know, if you're on a board, advisory, executive, that's what you're there for, you know, to give your insights, to give advice. Sometimes, you know, you're in, you know, a very responsible position, so you need to be able to push your opinions forward and get heard.
Actually, when you're on a board, it's actually about questioning. It's not about often directing, it's about asking lots and lots of questions. So you need to, there's a difference between being an executive and implementing, and being on a board and governing. And there is a really big difference between that. And actually the shift from executive to board is a really hard one often when you come up through the ranks, because you want to do and you want to tell. And it's not about that, it's about asking really smart questions, reading the data, facilitating conversations. And as we all know, we have good coaches. Often you do know the answers, but you need someone to really scratch away at those onion layers. So I think questioning is really important. Like anything, if you don't know, go and find somebody that's done it before, not just one, but a few people. Find people that are different from you, have worked in different environments. Most of the time, people are very generous with providing information and guiding you. So do some of those research, but it's about asking good questions.
Yeah. Soon we'll have a challenge for female talent between governance and operations. It'll be a tension point. Yeah. I'd like to ask Sami Mobasagi, who's one of our PhD students, to ask a question.
Good evening. It's harder for assertive, ambitious women to be seen as likable, and easier to conclude that they lack some intangible quality of leadership. Men remain threatened by assertive women. When women negotiate for change, they are labeled intimidating, bossy, or aggressive. The problem with values like respect and courage is that everyone perceives them differently. They are too ambiguous and open to interpretation. Instead of uniting us, they can cause friction. As a female in ICT, I had to be better than men to be considered equal. I believe women are never taught to fight for themselves. We tend to be brought up thinking life is fair and that you thrive and deliver and the rest will take care of itself. It does not work like that in reality. With reference to the above, can you define a set of values to shape the culture of an organization towards embracing women, and are there some practices to test them? Thank you.
Who wants to tackle that one first? Tim's got some thoughts.
So I'll share the thoughts. I don't know that I have answers, but that's the spirit of the conversation. Look, any word can be interpreted in different ways, and so no matter what list of words we came up with, it would be possible for them to be construed in ways that is constructive, or equally possible for them to be construed in ways that block change. You know, on the way over, I was stuck in traffic, which is why you all got 2 drinks, not 1 tonight. And,
Thanks, Tim.
And I was listening to the Senate debate on the Same-Sex Marriage Act, and hearing people who were clearly going to vote no in the Senate, argue how that is out of respect of human rights. And it was just, like, it's a fascinating turn for me. That's not how I would be voting if I was in the Senate, and I'll make that position clear to everyone. So, but it was fascinating to me hearing the words put out there and then hearing a logic and rationale interpreted from them. And I think that they genuinely believe the position that they were coming from. So no matter what words we chose as values, I think they could be interpreted in ways that lead to the outcome that you talk of. For me, it's actually about intent. And so it's what sits beneath the words. And it's one of the reasons why I do think that setting goals and measuring and saying that's where we're going. We've made the decision, we understand the science, we understand the logic, we understand why it's going to be good for our clients and good for our business. So we've made the decision, we're going there. And it's actually the intent of people to get there. And so we have a set of values at MYOB. We talk about them openly. The highest score we get on our team engagement surveys are, I know the MYOB values, I know how to live the MYOB values. But you know, it's genuinely about the intent. So I don't think you can just put values out there. I think you've got to put values, you've got to put goals, and you've got to have the intent to leverage those values to achieve those goals. And if all you do is have good intention and put some words out there and say their values, they will be left up to interpretation, and people will interpret them differently. If you actually say that's where we're headed and we're going to measure against that, and these values are a way to help us get there, but they're not the means to the end, they're the path to get there, they're not the end point, then you're more likely to have the values interpreted in the way that they were intended to be interpreted. I don't know if that helps.
Values being lived. Other questions? Other answers?
I mean, I can...
If you have a question for Sammy, yeah.
So, you know, I mean, Data61 is relatively young, 18 months old. Two very different cultures coming together to form a single culture. And I think for the organisation, as I'm out talking with people, the most important thing that I think we've done okay in pockets but not consistently is to, when it comes to values, make sure that there is a shared understanding of intent and then also consequences for not living the values day to day. And I mean, it's not, I don't broadcast it, but we've exited people who don't align with values that we've defined already within Data61, but it's going to be a big focus. It is important to create that culture and that environment where everyone can thrive.
We might jump to Francesca Astolfi from the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science to ask her question.
Thank you. Good evening, panel. I think you've partly answered this question already, but my question is, we keep hearing about critical skills shortages in digital tech. We also keep hearing about the massive attrition of women tech students and workers because of endemic sexism in the tech industry. The question I have is, what can we do about this? How can we fix it? And is there a role for government, or is it a role primarily for industry?
Thank you. Government, industry, who's responsible for changing this mentality?
Look, my view, if we wait for government, we might be waiting a very, very long time. And I don't know that you can legislate intent. I don't know that you can legislate values. I mean, I was interested in the sort of the call for a royal commission into the banking industry over culture, because I'm just not sure that a royal commission is ever going to be able to come out with outcomes that a government can act on to change culture inside a business. I think it's the leaders who are there on a daily basis that set the culture, and I think they need to. What are the hard things in doing that? You know, first we've got to make sure that everybody is committed to that, and that we have leaders in industry who are committed to that change. We've got to measure and hold them accountable to that. But the really hard thing is someone who would say, you know, I've made those declarations, I am there, is actually just what it means on a daily basis. What you walk past, what you pick people up on, what you allow the organisation to morph and empower people to go on their own journey of discovery versus where you draw lines. And my perspective on change is if you know where you're going, you've made a good case for it, you've just got to do it in increments. And if you want to try and get to the end point immediately, generally you fail, and you've got to push as hard as you can to make as much progress as you can, but you've got to put milestones out there and move towards them. I was in a situation just recently in a team meeting at work where there was some morning tea that was provided, and someone made a comment that they'd never go past a Portuguese tart. So a couple of people looked around and I looked around. It was clear to me that that person, with the innuendo in their voice, had insulted a number of others. And so as the CEO in the room, if I allow that to happen, what does it say? So I had to make a decision. How do I deal with this? And we were just leaving for a break. It's why morning tea was there. And I saw this person head out, and I went straight up to them and said, listen, I don't know if you're aware, but you just offended a number of your colleagues. And when we go back in, I'm going to open and I need you to apologise. Now, I didn't make it a public statement that I did that, because my read on it was when the CEO does that, it's actually a very heavy-handed movement to someone who's new to our organisation. So they're in their first couple of months. And I didn't want to end their career effectively at that moment, but I also wasn't willing to sit back and accept that that comment was made inside our organisation without a recognition that making people feel uncomfortable over their gender because of what he thought was just a light-hearted joke was acceptable. Now, I don't know if my actions were right or wrong, but those are the sorts of things that on a daily basis you have to do. And I think if you want to create change, then maybe in a few more years' time, when our organisation's further down the path, I would reflect on that and say, actually, you should just call it out in public right then and there. But those are the types of things that I think if we want to really make the change, it's at that level that we've got to do it. And I don't think government plays a real role at that sort of day-to-day level.
So what we walk past, we endorse.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of talk about unconscious bias, and I think there's a lot of language every single day that men and women, and also when you're parents of children, you don't realise sometimes the impact of language or actions or your behaviours, and it's not malicious. It's just things that you forget, and sometimes people do actually. We all need to be caught out on that. I also think that great organisations are built on great talent, and so there will or should be always us voting with our feet. I think some of the scandals that have happened, not just in the US, but very publicly, we'll call out Uber. That culture is so incredibly toxic. And we've seen that the consumers actually voted with not getting in Ubers. So those kinds of things where you actually have as individuals power to choose your employer of choice, to vote with your feet, to call people out. Hollywood is doing the same thing, and goodness, what is happening right now. So I think we do need to be much more public about that, and also be much more aware of what we're saying and we're doing, and kind of really act on those values.
I wanted to add to that. I completely agree we need to be conscious of our language. But I'd like to tell you a short story about a gentleman who's state manager of one of the largest technology companies in the world in Queensland. And he came to me maybe 9 months ago and said, I've got a big diversity problem at our company. I'd really like to hire more women. The problem is there just aren't any with this level of experience. What should I do? So we spoke about, reshaping the advertising, and he said, well, what about creating a new role? So we have a graduate, we can bring in these younger women into the organisation. Big champion of women in digital, really very supportive. So we've been working together around, improving his diversity over time. And I put him forward to speak on a panel for women in technology. And he was speaking and said, you know, the guys and girls are my team. And one of his panelists, fellow panelists, said, can I just stop you there? And he got slaughtered in front of an entire audience, you know, and the rest of the panelists were then, you know, like lobbying him, like how wrong he was for saying that. And I just really feel so sorry for him that he's such a champion of diversity, yet he couldn't get it right. So I feel like the more we nitpick at these people, it's about intention. You know, of course, he shouldn't have said guys and girls, but it's such a small thing. Yet I feel, you know, that sort of action is going to make him feel less comfortable being outspoken about diversity, and other men in the audience might have thought, I'm never going to talk about this, I don't know what to say. So I think, you know, we really need to get behind intent and action.
Great. I'm going to open up the floor to a couple of questions from the audience, and short, sharp, sweet, rapid fire, so we can get through some more content before we have to wrap up. So does anyone have a question from the floor? Oh, straight up. Yes, love it. Love the enthusiasm.
Hi, I'm Renee Noble. I'm from Grok Learning, Data61, and the coordinator of Girls Programming Network Australia. Come talk to me later. My question is, a lot of the time we're just poaching women from other companies. Google goes to Atlassian, Atlassian goes to Data61, and Data61 goes to wherever. So what do you guys think of companies who aren't supporting the pipeline of women from school through university into graduate programs and into the workplace? A lot of places are just looking for women who are ready to go and aren't putting the effort into creating the women that they want in their workplace.
What do you want to say to the cherry pickers out there? That's what, sure, who would like to tackle that?
Vote with your feet. I mean, it is like if we think about where the country's at and we think about big levers for the country to really drive systemic change that we need, I think there's a shared responsibility in that. And so I think it's about creating a movement. And the best way to do that is to, I think, vote with your feet.
Vote with your employment contract. Who you're willing to sign with.
And I guess hopefully those companies that do foster young talent will be rewarded with loyalty. I know the industry is notorious for job hopping, but you know, there are some examples where companies have sponsored that talent and they've, you know, grown into great leadership positions.
Fabulous. More questions from the audience. We've got first, quick on the draw over there.
Hi, my name's Erin. I'm currently one of 2 female engineers in the Data61 robotics group in Pullenvale in Brisbane. The lack of gender diversity is often really hard to avoid when you're the only female in a meeting of 20 men. And Adrian, you spoke briefly about what Data61 is doing to change this. But to help to frame the success of these programs, I often find it's useful to look at why this problem exists in certain pockets. So why do you think CSIRO and Data61 haven't been successful in gender diversity in sites like Pullenvale?
I feel like, Adrian, you're probably best placed to answer that one. Of the panelists, unless anyone else.
Yeah, so there's no question. So the number for us is 22% overall for the organisation is female right now, which is not good enough. So in that particular field of robotics as well, there's not been a conscious, I don't think there's been a conscious decision to address it. I think some of the things that I've spoken about, like SAGE, are early. So whilst there's a lot of things that are starting up, I don't think we're seeing the impact or the result of those things. There are other things that I didn't mention that we are doing, but they're early. So when I look across the organisation, I don't think you know, in pockets I don't think it's right the way that it is, and so we're going to change things to address it. So I don't know what else I can say. I mean, there's a historical situation, and then there's actions that we take to address it. And I agree with Tim. I think we have to be open and transparent, and we publish our statistics. We'll continue to publish our statistics, and we'll continue to try and drive systemic change. But but it's going to be a journey to get there. It's like we can't upend the entire organisation immediately. It's going to be logical, progressive steps, but with transparent timelines and targets.
I can't answer for Data61, but just to put some numbers around it because I think it's helpful. At MYOB, we're 41% women. 39% of managerial roles are held by women. But if you look in our engineering and product teams, it's 24% women. And if you look at leadership roles in our software engineering team, it's 8% women. We've got a 15% gender pay gap across MYOB. It is not because we have men and women doing the same roles being paid differently, because we've done an audit of that, and I'm confident that to the extent that exists, it's very, very small. It is because the highest paid roles in our organisation are engineers, and women are underrepresented there. Within the engineering team, the highest paid roles are the more senior architects and some of the leadership roles, and that's where you get the 8%. And so what that permeates through our organisation is a 15% gender pay gap. It will take us a decade to close that. Right, so we're committed at the grassroots level of trying to bring in 50% and a minimum of 40%. But to the question earlier of just poaching from here and not actually changing the profile of the overall industry, our perspective is we are going to find at those entry-level roles a very different proportion of women than we have through the stock of our team today. But we're not sacking people because of their gender, because even if we did, we'll grow our software engineering team by about 100 people next year. We couldn't do that and find women to fill those roles. So it's a problem. The reason it exists is we haven't been focused on this for the last decade. Like, we're absolutely committed to focusing on it for the next decade. Yeah. And if we do that, I think in 10 years' time we come back and be able to see a profile in our software engineering team that mirrors more of the rest of the organisation. But I would be absolutely disingenuous and misrepresenting the situation if I said we've got a plan in place, it's an 18-month plan and we're going to change it. It's not going to happen because of the talent pool. But frankly, that's why I'm here tonight and other things, because I think what we've got to do is make that a much broader conversation and all be a part of that solution.
And I hope in 10 years we don't have these sort of panels anymore. It'll probably more be people in tech, because AI will have taken over all of the...
How do we get
it'll be all of us. It'll be human beings in tech. We're going to wrap up because there's wine out there and snacks and nibblies with our name on it. What I would like to ask the panel, though, as part of your active listening practice throughout this evening, is to share one new thing that you've learnt or taken away from the conversation we've had today and the questions that have been asked, or one specific change you want to make tomorrow in the way that you operate in your organisation. Karen?
So I'm really good at having conversations with people and then giving myself more work, so I'm going to do the opposite. So I think my challenge to every single one of you is whether that's your mum, your daughter, your friend, a colleague, when they are thinking about going for a new job, to really encourage them when they don't think they're ready, and to pull them forward whenever you feel like they are staying here, to give them the confidence to go forward, because not always do we have the confidence to go forward. Often for many women it's the confidence and the belief in others about your capability, and each one of us have an opportunity to take that ladder, particularly if you're higher up that organisation, and throw, we don't need a ladder, we need a net, and throw that to anyone around you and pull them up. And that's male or female, but particularly if you've got a female in your life, I would love you to do that.
Great. Adrian?
Yeah, so for me, as I said right up front, I'm absolutely committed to this. Diversity in all its forms. And I know a lot of the conversation has moved to gender diversity because of the nature of the event, but diversity in all its forms. And so what I'm going to be doing is we're holding an all-hands meeting in a couple of weeks. At that all-hands meeting, I'm going to talk more about targets and tracking progress in terms of diversity across the board, but then I'm going to ask everyone in the organisation to take some shared responsibility for the organisation getting there, because it's everybody's responsibility.
Fabulous. Irene, between Stanford and your graduation, what? Oh my gosh,
so many things, so many opportunities. I really like what you said at the end, you know, including everyone into the conversation. I was just thinking, as a young female, you know, there's so many ways I can give back to the community that used to support me, that still supports me, you know, women in engineering. But I would love to support older females as well, because we spoke about diversity, and diversity does include people of different age. So I'm trying to find ways to include, you know, people that are older than me who have more experience into conversation, males into the conversation. And I think, you know, between tomorrow, Stanford, everywhere I go, this will be a great conversation starter. And realise tonight there are a lot of people in this conversation, and it is a movement. It's not about conversation, it is including everyone, and it is about, you know, starting a movement, continuing the movement.
Great. Tim, what's something you've learned?
So I think the thing that perhaps shocked me the most was Karen's response to the very first question around what's the problem, and she said you. And look, one of the things that's been just playing on my mind, the benefit of setting goals and tracking them is when you don't hit them, you reflect on why and what you need to do. And there's one in particular around participation in management training in our organisation where it slipped in the last 6 months, and I saw the numbers, and I've been trying to reflect on why and just asking people and etc. But that comment is the one that is just sitting with me right now, and particularly around that situation in our business. So I don't know quite what I'm going to do about it, but the answer surprised me. I was expecting all of the answers to come from the opposite angle, that the company should do this and etc. And maybe part of the problem is actually having an honest conversation about the responsibility of the individual.
Yeah. Creating a safe environment for them to step up as well. Yeah. Great. Holly?
I loved the comment about accepting or being happy about being a token. Because, you know, this is obviously something a lot of women think about. And maybe that's another barrier. Women go, I'm not going to take that role. I don't want to be your dirty token. I'm not going to, you know. So, you know, something that I'm going to go forth and do is, you know, uncover more examples where women have said, I'm the token, that's okay. You know, whilst we're in that awkward growing phase, I think this is something that we need to accept. Some companies will actively be saying, we just need a woman. We just need to, you know, tick that box. The AICD is coming down hard on us. We just need to improve our diversity. And highlight those examples, you know, probably through my Women in Digital website. You know, share the stories of women who have managed to succeed in these roles and, you know, like yourself, become a chair of 2 boards. It's very impressive.
The benefits of being a dirty token.
Yeah.
An awkward dirty token. I want to say thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and please do stick around for some nibbles and some chats, and keep on asking these fabulous panelists all of your great questions. I know there are quite a few that we didn't get to, so I really appreciate your patience. Thank you so much to our amazing panel here. Thank you for giving your time and giving your thoughts and having good debate, robust conversation. Really appreciate it. We have a little token in robot gift bags. Excellent.
Did you think about who was having white and red?
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. Feel free to join us for drinks.